Hey everyone, and welcome to another Konoha Reviews. Today we take a look at World of Warcraft Shadowlands, the latest expansion for the long-lasting popular MMO. In the past, I've done some retro reviews for earlier expansions to see if their content is still worth playing, and there are still a lot of expansion I will have to review. But for this video, I'm skipping ahead a bit as this game just dropped last week. Though I have been playing World of Warcraft for a long time, from the vanilla actually, it was my first experience of being at the max level when a new expansion dropped, so I finally got to experience all the madness that came with a new release. From all the players gathering at the spawn of the first quest, to having to wait in long queues of over an hour later in the day, to having a disconnect and coming back to a black character screen. Luckily, the overall experience was still pretty good since I tried to play on the times where it wasn't that busy and succeeded mostly. I also had a moment where it was several hours into the launch, meaning it was very early in the morning. Those few who were going realms first were probably way ahead of me. The ones with a regular schedule probably already went to bed after trying it out for an hour, and so at a certain point I was seemingly the only player walking around in various areas like the big city or bastion. I honestly felt a bit like a pathfinder or a pilgrim, going on a journey ahead of the herd. Now Oribos is full of bustling life, but I remember that very same night where there wasn't a single soul around. No pun intended. A lot of eyes were fixated on Shadowlands, since many players were not very happy with the previous expansion, Battle for Azeroth. I personally thought that the build-up, the initial storyline, and the questing in Battle for Azeroth was actually very cool and well-paced. But where it went off the deep end for me was that the patches afterward did not really add a whole lot of weight, and in the end, the fourth war did not really seem all that impactful. Where the third war had so many repercussions for many different characters, of whom many died or were altered, this was not really the case here. Maybe one or two characters died, but that was about it. And the switched focus to Nazjatar, and then eventually N'Zoth, also seemed a bit underwhelming since it took away from the cool story and potential that was set up with the initial launch. So many people hoped for redemption with Shadowlands, and I can honestly say that it has succeeded in doing some things very right, and others it falls a bit short on. Let's dive deeper and find out what they are. So first things first, let's talk about the story and setting, since this is what you will have to face during the initial leveling phase. Rather than having the leveling continue from level 120 to 130 like we were used to, Shadowlands introduced a level squish and set all the players back to 50, and so the leveling experience now is from 50 to 60 if you're up to date. Now I have a very unpopular opinion about this leveling squish, but I will talk about that more towards the end of the video, since for now I want to focus on the story. So after the events of the Fourth War are over and N'Zoth is defeated, Sylvanas heads to Icecrown and defeats Bolvar in a very easy battle, after which she rips up the Lich King's helmet, which severs the borders of the realm between life and death. Sylvanas heads towards the realm of the dead to seek the help of the Jailer, a powerful being with a large army under his disposal. Though the premise of going to the Shadowlands, their realm of death, is very cool, I felt like they rushed the build-up to it a bit. Sylvanas, for example, one-hits Bolvar basically, and various high-ranking characters like King Anduin are captured by the Jailer's forces. But rather than being overwhelmed in an epic battle, or Anduin trying to hold out until he can't no more and is abducted, the actual video is just him standing near his father's grave and getting yoinked by two Dark Angels. Greymane even screams "No!" without really doing anything. It kind of feels quickly written to have a reason to get to Shadowlands, and in a way it feels sloppy. But with the first of the quests, you head over to Icecrown and meet Bolvar in person, and I was very happy that this was another storyline where the Alliance and the Horde sorta team up to fight a greater evil. These conflicts are my personal favorites, since it feels much more epic as the whole world is in danger and former enemies need to join forces to stop it. After forming a ritual, you arrive at the Maw and get a taste of the actual endgame zone, which is their form of the worst circle of hell. It may seem a bit weird, but I actually really loved the written Divine Comedy by Dante, and even read it while I was in university. There he describes the 9 rings of hell, and this takes some inspiration of that as well. You see souls everywhere, some still unaware that they met their ultimately demise back on Azeroth. They have some very fun Easter eggs too, with some of the souls heading towards hell still screaming, "For the Horde!" or for the Alliance, as they clearly were killed in battle. I wonder if there's an Easter egg of one soul somewhere screaming Leroy Jenkins when he died. During this intro questline, you actually get to interact with some very prominent characters, including King Anduin, Jaina Proudmoore, Thrall, and Bane Bloodhoof. I actually really like these story-driven quests, with these larger-than-life characters accompany you. It's a lot more linear than your average questing in WoW, but I'm one of those weirdos that reads the quests and loves the lore, so I'm all for it. What I will say that is very good and pretty much counts for the entire expansion is that the cutscenes have improved a lot. And I'm not talking about the pre-rendered cutscenes, which have always been great. I am talking about the in-game cutscenes, where your own characters also play a role in. They often were very minimal and had choppy animations in previous expansion, but this time it really feels like more effort was put into them and a lot more complex animations are being used here. The intro questline will take about an hour or so, and it's pretty epic, but does not reach the epic levels of the intro quests in expansions like Warlords of Draenor or Legion, which felt like full-on D-Day invasions. There are some pretty funny quests along here too, with Thrall throwing his weapon at an enemy, and thus you have to find him a new weapon as he tries out different things, however awkward it might be. Eventually you get separated from these characters again and arrive at the newest capital city in this expansion, Oribos. And this is probably my biggest critique of the expansion, and that is that this city does not leave a great impression. Large cities in WoW have always been very cool to explore and felt distinct and unique. It was fun to be in places like Stormwind, Dalaran, or Borealis because they actually felt like lived-in places. But Oribos feels kinda empty and not like a city at all. It makes sense in a way because these are heavenly beings, so they might not need places to sleep, rest, or eat, but still it feels more like a big round hall rather than a city. It's somewhat comparable to the capital city of the Draenei, by far the worst city in regular Azeroth, as that too does not look like a livable city at all. You will spend a lot of time in these capital cities, upgrading your profession, getting new loot, getting new gears, which is why always making the capital city very interesting an important factor. But since the new capital city is my biggest critique of this expansion, does that mean that the rest is quite good? Well, I'm happy to say that yes, I find that the rest is quite good with some hiccups here and there. From the capital city, you head on over to your first leveling zone in the form of Bastion, their version of Heaven. Rather than how they did it with Legion and BFA, in Shadowlands you cannot really choose your leveling zone in the beginning, and have to abide by a linear path. Though this might sound negative to some, it actually creates for some pretty good storytelling since events and problems from certain zones get taken into account and have consequences in other zones. For example, Bastion at a certain moment gets attacked by the forces from the realm of Maldraxxus, and thus after that quest is done, your next objective would be to go to the next zone and find out what caused the attack. Then after that, there is a zone that copes with a horrible drought, and you will find the reason why in the zone after that one. This makes it to where the story feels much more linked and way less like a separate own set piece within a bubble like it did with Legion or BFA. Now that isn't to say that the questing is all that perfect throughout. The initial introduction to Bastion is great. I really love the look of this place. It's bright, colorful, and its inhabitants are very funny looking. Especially the owl stewards are great and have very fun animations like scrubbing the floors, carrying drinks or documents, or repairing mechanical guards. You also befriend some blue human-like characters who hope to become angels, or Kyrian, as they are called in the game one day. The few intro quests are pretty fun with you being introduced to Heaven and how you'll be tested on how good you are of a person. But unfortunately, it doesn't take too long before you have to do some trials and later on need to rely on unlocking someone's memories by doing similar things you did in expansions like Pandaria. Also, the trial thing reminded me of one zone from Legion. And I'll say that though the zone is very pretty and the characters are great, the questing in Bastion won't really turn any heads or bringing WoW quests to new levels. I realize it might seem difficult to expect an expansion to raise the leveling experience to new heights, but it has happened in the past with expansions like Wrath introducing much more variety and introducing phasing, Cataclysm making it far less grindy, and later expansions like Legion making the overall scale more epic. I will say that during various quests in Shadowlands, you actually get some choice in answers that you give. From what I understand, your answers won't really alter anything, but the fact that you can sit there and think for a minute to give an answer gets appreciated. When you are introduced to Bastion, you can for example tell them where you're from, and in my case, I could have told them I was from Azeroth, from Draenor, or from Argus, which I chose since I had my cute companion Una at my side. Then at a certain point you actually get to choose your own owl steward, and you have a choice from a large roster of different cute looking owl characters, each with some unique ability, look, or voice. I personally went for Pico, and my partner went for Minta. Later on in a different zone, you also need to forge fake documents, and you could put some really funny answers in there too. Now even though I said that the questing in Bastion isn't anything new, it also doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just what you've come to expect. There are some cool sequences, like a training ground getting attacked by Dark Angels, or the earlier mentioned invasion by the Maldraxxus forces. By the time I was done with Bastion, I think I was level 53 or 54, and the overall leveling flow is quite good as long as you do the main quests. I was halfway done with the final zone when I hit 60, and it has definitely been much worse with expansions like Pandaria or Cataclysm, where you could be done leveling in the first or second zone. So the initial Bastion area was a good, albeit safe beginning, and next up was Maldraxxus, my least anticipated zone, since it's an afterlife for the wicked and the warriors with a plague-ridden battlefield of eternal combat. But to my surprise, it was actually Maldraxxus that had some of the best storylines and quests for me in store. First off, the intro is absolutely amazing, with you arriving in the Theater of Pain and partaking in this giant gladiator battle where hundreds of players and mobs are battling it out. It was really epic and felt like we were thrown into the deep end. Kinda like we just had died and arrived in the afterlife, after which only seconds we received a weapon in our hands and were thrown in the lion's den. No time to explain, just fight and survive. And survive we did, after which you get accustomed a bit more about the different houses that wage war on one another in this realm. In each zone, you also get to reconnect or meet characters from previous games or expansions. And Maldraxxus actually had the biggest impact with us, meeting Draka, Thrall's mother, who of course also played a big role in the Warcraft movie. It was cool to find out how she found new purpose in the afterlife and how much she had changed altogether. And though I find it very cheap in stories when they bring characters back to life after they died, I am okay with having them return in the realms of the afterlife, since it means that they are still stuck to that realm now and forever. Same with the character who has her rebirth in the zone after Maldraxxus, which could have been cheap if she were to come back to Azeroth, but with how it's done here, it fits very well. Despite Maldraxxus being about plague-ridden lands, there was a surprising amount of variety in its various areas, and a lot of them felt very cool. From the home base with so many awesome looking characters patrolling the halls, all getting ready for glorious battle. It's a Spartan's version of heaven for sure. The story eventually unfolds about a sword, which you have to power up to eventually open a secret door that leads to the so-called Primus. To do this, you'll be sent to different fronts and need to do your kinda standard fetch quests. But what makes it that these quests are a bit more interesting, and therefore also better than Bastion, is that they have slight variations that make them feel less monotonous or repetitive. There's for example a quest to collect pollen, but instead of killing enemies or touching various items, you need to pull out these hair follicle looking plants, after which your character falls over in a funny animation. Or at a certain point you need to create your own cute pet slime which follows you around, and you need to give him the order to head into toxic waste and collect items for you. In essence, it's the same type of fetch or collect quest you've always known, but having to order the slime and seeing him get in the waste and then coming back, slightly larger and with an item holding inside it, it makes it feel better and a bit new. Or a quest where you take control over a robot and need to head through a hazardous zone and close valves so that you and your party can continue through it. In other games, this might seem like the most standard of things, but to me it's a blessing to have a quick break from kill 10 or 12 enemies, which there's still plenty of. There's also a pretty cool section where you take control of an abomination created from angels, and overall, I just really was surprised with the Maldraxxus experience in a positive sense. Then the third area is Erdenwald, which is by far the most beautiful area, but unfortunately for me, it was also the zone with the least interesting quests. There's a few standouts, especially towards the end, and I will say that the climax questline is very cool and epic. Also, throughout multiple times in the story of this zone, you get treated to some pretty epic displays as the fairies and inhabitants gather round, march, or take part in battle or rituals. but many of the quests involve just searching for spirits or pinning dead bodies or killing enemies and collecting their energy. This is definitely the zone that feels most like the standard WoW when it comes to their quests, but the overall zone, characters, and vibe is still very lovely. Again, as said before, Shadowlands does many things right but also stumbles a bit in other parts, but never really ultimately fails. The final zone is also awesome, as you head to Revendreth, this Castlevania/Bloodborne looking gothic area where the vampires rule. This zone overall is just amazing. Though it's very dark and gloomy, which I usually don't like, it fits the story and setting so well. This is the part of the afterlife where troubled or evil souls get one last chance for redemption before ultimately being sent to hell. That's why the vampires look so menacing, because it's their task to punish the souls who did evil things in order for them to redeem themselves and eventually have a future outside of the maw. The looming castles and towers in the distance are beautifully created, and it just oozes so much atmosphere. The quests are great too, with you having to awaken stone gargoyles for your armies, search various tombs for sin stones, which have the sins and punishments written on them for various souls, or taking part in a hunt, the worst punishment for the most defiant souls, where they get released in a terrible forest and then being hunted down as they succumb to fear. In each zone, you also get 2 exclusive new abilities, one that's dependent on your class, and one that is shared amongst everyone and is often a movement spell. In Ardenwald, you can transform in a celestial fox, for example, and as a vampire, you can teleport almost like a blood satanic blink ability. The storyline in the vampire realm also has some pretty cool twists and turns, with some seemingly not being as good as they are, or others not as evil. In the end, you get to meet a whole bunch of quirky and funny characters, one who for example enjoys tea way too much and who is very posh with his parasol shielding him from the sun rays. The overall questline here ends with a very cool all-out assault on the Gothic castle, and it's a well-deserved climax for the overall campaign. It must have taken me around 15 or so hours to get through the campaign of just leveling, and I find that's a very good time, especially considering this is just an expansion, and for the same price, you can get other games that are half the time of just the leveling experience here. But what about, of course, the endgame? Well, that is always a difficult question to answer, with a review in the first weeks, as multiple months need to have passed to see if the endgame still holds up. I will say that for now, it at least feels like there's much more to do to keep you busy and occupied when you reach level 60. Once you are done with a campaign, you need to join one of the 4 covenants, which is a very important choice. It will give you a base of operations and open the path to exclusive quests, a weekly event, exclusive armor sets, mounts, and more. As you do dailies and weekly events, you will level up your renown with that covenant you choose up until level 40, and I hope to see different and new things added with each or every few level ups, because the grind with, for example, the horrific visions was too much the exact same week in, week out, with the changes taking too long and being too grindy for a good flow. World quests get reintroduced, and they seem pretty fun so far, though nothing too new under the sun here. The dungeons are very cool and have some awesome mechanics that make them more than just stand there and spam the attack button. One boss, for example, has one of the party members separate from the battle, and they need to run through a tiny little gauntlet before killing a weak enemy and being sent back to the others to continue the battle. There's this time also plenty of dungeons to keep you busy, both on normal and heroic difficulty, with a great variety in look, feel, and mechanics. Finally then, there is Torghast, which is the dungeon you can either do by yourself or in a party, and this takes inspiration from roguelikes, where you head up an everlasting tower and need to clear each floor. Each floor is randomized, and so you will face different enemies, but also different environmental hazards each time, and see how far you can get to unlock epic rewards. The really cool thing here though is that you often get rewarded with new perks and abilities, which are randomized too. Sometimes you need to choose between 2 different stat boosts, like more HP or a higher critical strike rate. Then other times you get rewarded for killing a bonus boss by receiving 2 extra perks at once. These perks only last throughout your dungeon run, but are really cool since they give you really buffed up stats. From what I understand, they are quite a bit toned down compared to the beta, but to me and my partner they still felt very powerful and cool to explore. Some abilities give you, for example, an insta-kill on the weakest mob types, and others added new effects to already learned abilities. My only critique here is that the overall look of Torghast is a bit bleak and boring, and I'm afraid it doesn't look appealing enough to make it fun to do week in, week out for multiple months. But the addition of these randomized elements definitely extends the lifespan so much of this dungeon, and therefore is so much more fun than a horrific vision from BFA. I hope that they will implement these randomized elements in upcoming expansions and updates as well to lengthen the lifespan of new events that hopefully will look and feel a lot better. So overall, the expansion does a lot of things right and a few things a bit bad. The build-up and story is not as epic as BFA started out with, but the zones, characters, quests, and the lore are standard to very good. Now with of course this expansion also came the level squish I talked about earlier, and the overall leveling experience has been altered greatly. There's a new intro zone, which is okay, but it works out the same for both the Horde and Alliance, and I see myself quickly becoming tired of it since it's the same experience every time you play. If you play in the zone adhering to your race, which you can still do luckily, you will still get the same types of intro quests, but at least the setting and story will be very different. I will say that the only reason why you maybe would want to do this new intro zone is because you can beat it in an hour and then continue leveling where you want, which is the best addition of this expansion. With Chromie Time, you can choose any of the expansion and start questing there, as the levels will be scaled to your own. It's funny to see how imbalanced things still can be though, since leveling in the Burning Crusade will be so much more grindy and slow than compared to Warlords of Draenor. What's cool too is that you can switch expansion anytime. So if you only want to get a taste of Burning Crusade and then move on to Wrath or any other expansion, you can do this. So do not get me wrong, I think this leveling with Chromie Time is very good and really awesome. A great improvement for sure, but I would now like to mention what I said earlier, how my opinion of the leveling squish is very much the minority, because I haven't spoken or met anyone who dislikes the level squish, and in all honesty, I kinda do. I wished instead of going back to 50, we would have continued to level 130. Now the reasons are a bit superficial, but I've always loved just how stacked and chock full of content World of Warcraft is compared to the other MMORPGs out there. When you talk about another MMO game, and they say that the max level is only 70 or 80, I always think of WoW, and that you can level a whopping 120 levels, which is unheard of. It's just so full of content that it basically is a one-time purchase and it will be good for months to come. I think I took more than 6 months to get from level 1 to 120, and no other game has ever done that. Every time I reached a new expansion, I knew there were so many more adventures and expansions waiting for me after that, and it never got tedious to me. But I should also say that I only have one character at 120, or now 60. And I understand that most people who were so annoyed with this leveling experience were because of leveling alts. They did not want to start all the way from 1 again and do all that grinding to 120, which I understand, though I do love that epic journey and the fact that there's so much there. Now in a way, you can still do all the quests and stories if you want, even with Chromie Time. The only thing is that you will just be doing it for money and lore and not the experience and leveling. But therefore it also doesn't feel as a coherent, even flowing story, which I do miss. I loved going on that journey, that epic journey from level 1 all the way to level 120, and experience all the events that took place along the way, including the death of important characters, or how they grow, or the destruction of familiar places. And that now gets kinda hustled up and is not an essential part of the experience anymore. Personally, for me, the questing in most of the zones, except for Burning Crusade, are also fun and varied enough to where I can see myself not being too annoyed of leveling some alts there. But I should also say that I don't hate the level squish that much to the point where I will mope about it and scream that I won't play the game anymore. In fact, I would find it now very tiresome if they changed it back again, and it's fine the way it is now. They should leave it at that. But a part of me would have liked it more to continue to 130, because I also just love seeing improvement in stats. I understand that this is pure statistics, and even though we have become weaker in terms of numbers, comparable to how strong we are against mobs, it's still all the same. But I hope for those who are watching that they can understand how going back to 50 and then leveling up again to 60 feels more like a step backwards rather than forward to continue up to 130. I'm not kidding in that I hoped one day World of Warcraft would be so massive that you could level up to level 150 or maybe even 200. I guess the ultimate nightmare of any person making an alt. And as I said, I don't hate this level squish to the point where I will stop playing. And also the Chromie Time and the fact that you can now choose the expansion you want to play is very, very cool. I'll get used to it over time, and will also say that this level squish and my feelings about it will in no way negatively affect the score for Shadowlands. However, I will half-jokingly say that I'll stop playing WoW altogether if they make Sylvanas end up being the hero with what she is doing, much like they did with Kerrigan. Sylvanas is evil, and that bitch needs to be stopped. End of story. Don't disappoint me here, Blizz. Anyway, Shadowlands, in my opinion, is a great expansion that offers a very familiar but fun leveling experience with interesting and varied zones, and the endgame at this moment seems way more interesting compared to something like BFA. Time will tell how long it will last, and the upcoming 3 major patches will be even more important for the overall feel for Shadowlands. But for now, it is a great product. Shadowlands will not be seen as the best expansion ever, nor the second best, but it will also not be seen as the worst or second worst. It's very solid and stands on its own 2 legs amongst the others, and in the end, World of Warcraft Shadowlands gets an 8.1. There's still a lot I need to do when I'm currently writing this review. There are still mounts to collect, heroic dungeons to clear, more Torghast runs, dailies, adventures, toys and secrets to find, and heading back to various zones and do side quests like the wanted posters. I'm still happy that WoW is a game that just keeps on giving, and when it doesn't feel too grindy, it's still one of the best out there.